once again, welcome to my channel. So if you've been to my channel before, you would notice that I try to spend my time studying different topics that I feel aren't complete, that I feel don't give me the full story. So I go and I do my own research on each and every topic that I'm not understanding, so I can try to understand everything better from my own personal knowledge. I don't really like doing these videos, but I feel like society has been gravitating so far away from what should be common knowledge that I feel that I have to make these videos just to try to bring more awareness to what's going on, because it seems like there is a gravitation away from common sense, which is bringing us away from things that we used to know as a human species. So the thing I'd like to tackle today is the explanation of the Zodiacs. So there's two different studies when it comes to the Zodiacs and constellations. The one study is astrology and the other study is astronomy. So according to dictionary.com, astrology is the study that assumes and attempts to interpret the influence of the heavenly bodies on human affairs. So astrology in layman's terms is basically horoscopes and trying to understand the energies that are being placed, particularly from the zodiacs, because the zodiacs are located along our ecliptic plane. Astronomy, according to dictionary.com, is the science that deals with the material universe beyond the Earth's atmosphere. So astronomy is the science behind the stars. So it's what NASA would use to study the rotation of the stars in our solar system, and astronomy is what scientists are doing when it comes to finding other planets similar to Earth. When you're talking about the zodiacs, you could be talking about astrology or you can be talking about astronomy. So if you're talking about the spiritual part of the zodiacs, we have defined that that is not the science of astronomy. But the science of astronomy has certain stipulations to deciding what exactly is a zodiac and what isn't a zodiac. So if you are unfamiliar with the Earth and the Earth's rotation, or if you have minimal experience studying about it, the Earth rotates around the sun on what is called the ecliptic plane. If you follow our ecliptic plane, you will get the zodiacs. So all of the zodiacs are located on the ecliptic plane. The basic definition of what constitutes a zodiac and what doesn't constitute the zodiac is if a particular zodiac crosses our ecliptic plane, so that means it exists on both the north and the south side of our ecliptic plane, which is our rotation around the sun, and you transcribe that out into outer space, you will have certain constellations that will be north of that line as well as south of that line. Most of the constellations are not on our ecliptic plane. So this is why we have some constellations that we call zodiacs, and some constellations have nothing to do with our zodiacs. Now, each constellation not only has certain stars that are associated with that constellation, but each constellation, because of the stars it's associated with, have been also given boundary lines. So if you go and you look at the boundary lines of any of the constellations, you will see that all of the zodiacs have boundary lines that are north and south of our ecliptic plane. The zodiacs that are close to our ecliptic plane that don't cross our ecliptic plane on a regular basis, those constellations are not considered zodiacs. Most of our zodiacs, the whole star systems that we associate with that zodiac, in most cases will cross the ecliptic plane but in one rare case, it is just a boundary line that crosses, but all the other boundary lines don't normally cross our ecliptic plane. So our zodiacs are the constellations that cross our ecliptic plane every single year, no matter what our Earth's rotation and Earth's orbit is doing around the sun. So ancient societies used to be sun worshippers, and some ancient societies used to worship the moon. So the moon only has a 29.5 day phase, and our solar year is 365.25 days roughly. Since our rotation around the sun takes 365.25 days, our lunar cycle is not completely meshed with our solar cycle. So that's why a lot of people in ancient societies used to use solar calendar so that they could keep track of our position around the sun any given year, which is the calendar that we use now. Some ancient societies used to use a lunar calendar to keep track of where the moon was in rotation. Because of the amount of days that each rotation occurs and that each cycle has, it is almost impossible to have a dual calendar system that not only keeps track of the solar year, but that also keeps track of the lunar year, because not each rotation is perfectly synced with the other. So ancient society used to have a belief, because of their solar worship, that the sun provides the life on our planet, because if we didn't have the sun, then plants wouldn't be able to exist, and if plants didn't exist, then animals wouldn't have plants to eat, so animals wouldn't be able to exist. So this is the major reason why solar worship became popular, and there's lots of belief systems about the daylight being good and the night being evil, because the night is where the darkness is and the sun is where the light is, and the sun is what is good and provides nourishment, and basically the sun is what sets up. It's the whole introduction to our dualistic society. So as everybody knows, our day cycle is almost exactly 24 hours long. So the day cycle is how long it takes our planet to do one full rotation, so that the sun is in the same part of the sky from one day as it is to the following day. So because of this system of belief that the sun brings the energy, brings the power from the cosmos onto the earth, it provides life, it's the life bringer, it determines the cycles on earth. Because of that belief system, the zodiacs that we are actually celebrating are the zodiacs that are on the opposite side of the sun. So here on earth, we always have a dark side and we have a light side. And the dark side, you can always see zodiacs and constellations on our dark side. And in fact, during the nighttime, that's about the only time you can see the constellations. And we constantly go through an entire year of having different constellations. If you're located on the equator, you will constantly see the zodiac signs rotating through as we go around the Earth's orbit. So when you're located in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, you have completely different zodiacs that you see in the night sky, and they rotate in different manners than what they would if you were located on the equator. That's why we celebrate the zodiacs that are behind the sun, because the zodiacs that are behind the sun are the energy forces that are coming through the sun. So it's almost like they're using the sun as the magnifying glass, saying that the sun is bringing energy from that zodiac sign to the earth, and because the sun is the giver of life, that zodiac at that point in time of that year is the giver of life on planet Earth through the sun's energy. That's why we don't celebrate the zodiacs when they're in the evening sky. That's why we celebrate the zodiacs in the day light sky. But in the daytime, you can't actually see the zodiacs because the sun is too bright and they're on the far side of the sun. That's why ancient people used to spend a lot of time when it came to logging where the zodiacs were in relation to the earth, and they took the time to keep track of the zodiacs in location to where we were in our orbit, because they wanted to know what zodiac was on the far side of the sun, because of the fact that you can't actually see which zodiac is on the far side of the sun. So this is the main reason why ancient peoples took so much time and energy into studying the cosmos, is so that they knew what energy influences were influencing our planet at any given time. Now, astronomy doesn't care so much about this. This is the spiritual side of the zodiacs, so it doesn't care at all about what I just said, but astrology does care. And the reason why we have horoscopes is because of the astrology that is associated with astronomy. So the astronomy part of our Earth's orbit is distinct. We have different ways that our Earth exists. Our Earth's orbit around the sun has an eccentricity to it. So sometimes that eccentricity, and eccentricity basically means our orbit around the sun is not completely circular. So most of the time our orbit around the sun is kind of oblong. It's not perfectly circular. So a perfectly circular orbit would be the equivalent of like an E0 orbit. Our Earth's orbit is more related to an E0.5 orbit. So as we go around the sun, it's a little eccentric, but it's still kind of circular, right? So even though it's kind of circular, it's only a little bit oblong. So we actually get a little bit further away from the sun at different times of the years, and we're a little bit closer to the sun at different times of the years because of the eccentricity of our orbit. And then of course, the further you get away from E0, the more eccentric the orbit gets. So some planets and some solar systems have a really eccentric orbit, so you could say that they would have an eccentricity orbit of 0.9, which is a really huge eccentricity. And a lot of our asteroids that come into our solar system probably do have more of an eccentricity of 0.9, because they come in and they come really close to the sun and they almost like slingshot off of the sun and then zoom back out into outer space, and then eventually they're slowly pulled back into our solar system, and they come back in slowly, and as they get closer to the sun they gain up more speed until they go around the sun tightly again, and then they shoot back out. So that would be like an eccentricity of almost 1. The reason our Earth's orbit has an eccentricity is because we have other planets in our solar system. So if we were the only planet in our solar system orbiting around the sun, we would probably have an eccentricity of 0 almost all the time, most likely. Because our solar system has other planets in it, these planets, because they are larger planets, they have an effect on our Earth's eccentricity. So science has now been discovering that when Jupiter and Saturn are close to each other, because they're both the largest planets in our solar system, their gravity will actually pull us a little bit more away from the sun than what we originally were. And whenever Saturn and Jupiter are on the other side of the sun, obviously their gravity has almost no effect on Earth when they're on the opposite side of the sun from us. So since they would be exerting almost no pull on us, we would start approaching an eccentricity closer to 0. But as Jupiter or Saturn or the both of them pull on Earth, our eccentricity would go away from 0 and go more to like 0.5, because their gravity is pulling us away from the sun's gravity. So this is why we have different eccentricities throughout the year. and it'll change every year. Like some years we might have an eccentricity of 0.4, and then the next year we might have an eccentricity of 0.35, and then we could get pulled out to an eccentricity of 0.5 the following year. So our eccentricity changes from year to year depending on where the other planets are in the orbit in our solar system. So there is another aspect to our Earth's orbit, and it is known as migration. So even though we have an ecliptic plane that we basically follow for the most part, our migration off that ecliptic plane is very slight from year to year. So it's almost like Earth doesn't always have a perfect ecliptic orbit around the sun. Sometimes we will be a little bit north or a little bit south of that, and that also changes based on the gravity from other planets that are around us. So we do veer a little bit off the ecliptic plane now and then, but for the most part we have been able to average out where our migration is. So we're able to basically say that this is our ecliptic plane that we follow because it is the average of all the migrations. So because we do migrate a little bit from year to year, we can average out and find out where the ecliptic plane is most of the time, and where we are averaging out our rotation around the sun most of the time. So this is why we can almost pinpoint a precise spot where the ecliptic plane is, even though we have migration. Now, precession is another aspect of our planet, and precession has to do with the tilt of Earth. So Earth, as I said, tilts slightly on an axis, on an axis, either away or towards the sun, depending on the time of the year. Now this tilt that we have, it can vary from year to year. So right now they're saying that Earth's tilt could be around a 23.4 degree tilt away from what we would consider center based on our ecliptic plane. So if you consider our ecliptic plane to be 0 for where our Earth's North Pole should be facing, our North Pole is actually tilted 23.4 degrees away from the ecliptic plane center. And as time passes, we are slowly rotating around that ecliptic plane. So the precession of the equinox is what ancient societies have said is a great year, and a great year would be one full rotation around the precession of the equinoxes. It is roughly estimated that that is around 26,000 years. But as I can get into later, you'll find out that the Mayans had a different number that wasn't 26,000 years, and different societies have also used different numbers when it comes to the precession of the equinoxes. And the precession of the equinoxes determines what age we are actually living in. And we were said that during the time of Jesus, we were living in the age of Pisces. So Jesus rang in the age of Pisces with his teachings, and it says in the Bible that when the age comes to an end, that, I don't know the exact scripture, I mean I should have it ready so I can quote it exactly, but they were supposed to follow the water bearer, and the water bearer is Aquarius. There's a lot of controversy as to the exact date that we would be going into the age of Aquarius and leaving the age of Pisces. Some people think we are not in the age of Aquarius yet, and others think we have been in the age of Aquarius for a while. And it's not super important because there is always transition years in between ages, but I'm going to show some evidence that proves that I think we can actually perfectly pinpoint when each individual age would start. If you don't know much about the Zodiacs, you can go on to Wikipedia and look up the Zodiac dates on Wikipedia. And what you will find on Wikipedia is there is 3 different Zodiac dates that we could be using. So one of the the dates is known as the IAU boundary dates. So that date is all the zodiacs and the exact day that the sun is on the boundary line of each side of that particular zodiac. So you can go on there and you can find the IAU boundary dates on Wikipedia. Wikipedia will also give you, for the zodiacs, it'll give you a sidereal date. So the sidereal date is if you took the 12 zodiacs and you split them up into 30-day increments. So it's basically trying to average out, because each 12 zodiacs is not the exact same size. Some zodiacs are only like 10 days long, and other zodiacs are 40 days long. So the sidereal dates are a way of averaging out each zodiac so that they are exactly 30 days long. So if you had a 30-day month, sometimes 31 days, because 30 days for 12 months only works out to a 360-day year, and we actually have 365.25 days in a year. So some of these sidereal dates have to add an extra day onto their boundary to make it a 365-day year. But most of them, for the most part, would be 30 days long. So that's what the sidereal dates are. Now, we are using the tropical date system. So the tropical date system is what our current zodiacs are linked to. So when you think about the zodiacs and you go into the newspaper and you read your horoscope, what you are following is you're following the tropical date system. As you will find here coming up, I absolutely hate the tropical date system. It is so far away from the sidereal dates and the IAU boundary dates that I don't think it should even be used. I think we could get way better dates for each zodiac than what the tropical dates are.